9:35. We'll begin with adoption of the agenda. Take a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. It's all draft budget, so Councillor Prestige.
Make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Frank, and he will point us in the direction we need to go.
First, members of council, in front of you, you have the legal opinion, and I'm not going to go into details. It is provided for you for your reading pleasure. I'm just going to do a couple of highlights. Typically, legal opinions are provided to council in camera. However, as this legal opinion pertains to the budget specifically, and council asks for that legal opinion to be whether or not there are pecuniary interests when dealing with the budget. So there was a number of questions asked by the lawyer that has provided this legal opinion to whether or not Councillor Williams and Councillor Dean, as well as Mr. Prestige, Councillor Prestige, because I did know that his company that he works with part-time does occasionally do some business with us, so I reached out and extended that. So again, Councillor Dean does have a pecuniary interest when it comes to the stationery, that, and as long as you have a general discussion in regards to the budget and not specifically, he can still participate. But when we actually adopt the budget, we anticipate December 22nd, we'll bring out the line item for all, I think it's called material supplies, whatever the line is, and we'll ask that he be excused, and then everybody else can vote, and then he can come back and finish the vote on that. So you'll vote on that particular line item, and then he'll come back in and vote on the rest of the discussion. As far as Councillor Williams is concerned, in regards to his position as the fire chief for Port of Cinnamon, he is considered a volunteer and is exempt, and so he can participate in all the discussion. As far as Councillor Prestige, just so that we're aware, we don't do ongoing business with the company that he works for, so occasionally that is done in a competitive bid process. So if that's the case, and there were particular items before council, then Councillor Prestige would have to then declare himself. So at this point in time, again, all council can participate in the budget process based on that. The other thing I just want to point out on the, I think it's the last page, this is confidentially provided to the county, and if any of the councillors want to seek their own legal advice in regards to pecuniary interest, that's their responsibility, because it is their responsibility to believe whether they declare pecuniary interest or not. And that's all I have, and then Mr. Chairman, members of council, Alicia will take you through the budget document that you have in front of you that has also been posted on the website, and the rest of the staff are here to answer any specific questions in relation to their department.
Okay. Morning, Alicia.
So thank you all for coming today for our second look at the budget information. Budget values were previously provided to council. These new binders that were given to you after the Tuesday or Wednesday council meeting showed that it was a balanced budget and it is complete from an administrative perspective at this point in time. Also, at the end of our November 29th meeting, the direction from council was to return to you today with the capital budget a bit more prioritized than we had originally presented it. So we have brought that forward to you, and a handout was left on all of your seating areas, as well as we do have a copy to put up when we begin those discussions for anyone watching. We'll ask the department managers to come forward and sit in the center area when they're being addressed by council to answer any questions that you may have. Ending today, administration will be looking for direction from council. Direction will be that the information is good as presented and you're accepting it as information, and then we will anticipate returning to council at December 22nd meeting with the budgets to be passed, with the provisions made for it to be passed in two sections so that we can exclude any conflict of interest from the passing of it. And if that is not the case, then we're looking for council to accept the information today with the following areas identified that they need administration to bring back to them with either changes, further information, and direction in that way. So with that, if I can do this, we're going to begin with the capital budget. Personal preference that we take time when we're fresh to go over the large dollar items, and then we can make sure that we've satisfied all of those. And with that, I'll ask Nikita to bring up a copy of what has also been provided to all of you at your chairs. Further to the discussions of November 29th, we were requested to bring it back with a bit of prioritization done for it. You will see the first column remains the same and carry forward. Those are projects that are in progress right now at this time, so we have a requirement to bring those unspent dollars from 2021 into the 2022 budget to ensure those projects are completed. The next column for 2022 is our priority of items that we would like to see passed in this year's capital budget. And then we have extended it to be 2023 and a bit of a glimpse into 2024. So with that, I turn it over to council for discussion and any questions.
Okay. Anyone have any questions on the capital list? Councillor Dean?
Going by memory, I note the Woodlands Command truck, through the chair to Andre. Woodlands Command truck, I think, was it not $80,000 last time we looked at that, and now it's changed to 40?
Through the chair, Councillor Dean, that's correct, it was 85. What we are in consultation with the rest of the administration, what we are looking at doing is repurposing one of the infrastructure vehicles, and that would involve adding some equipment to that project.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, don't see any questions on the capital side.
Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to our operating budget. So presented before you today, if you recall, the plan previously adopted by council for the recovery was to ensure that there was no more than a 1% increase in expenditures for the 2022 year, and as well as to cap any increases in taxation at 3%. So revenue anticipated to be generated in 2022 in comparison to the 2021 budget is an additional $943,000. And the composition of that is noted for you below, with the 3% tax increase coming in at just under $600,000. We do identify, and there'll be more discussion on it when you get to the airport section of the operating budget, that there is an increase to that operating budget for the expense of working with the land, but we do anticipate revenue to offset those expenses. And then we've identified some additional cost recovery and grant items in that. Any questions before I proceed? I don't want to just blow forward and leave everyone with questions at the end.
Councillor Dean?
Just with respect to the tax increase, so through the chair to, I guess to council, because we'll be the ones making that decision. You know, I certainly respect the strategy that was undertaken by the previous council. But if this council decided to take a holiday from that 3% increase, then it'd be my understanding that we would task administration to go back and try and find $600,000 in savings. Is that the process?
It would be something along those lines, yes.
Okay.
And part of the problem is that there's within our current budget, we still have a $3 million uncollected tax component. And we don't know how that's gonna shake out in things. I mean, the idea was to continue on with where we're going, so
Yeah,
we'll have to have that discussion when we know a little bit more as to how the revenue comes in.
sure. Yeah, what I want to put on the table just is that there is an opportunity to change the strategy.
There is. Alicia, do you wanna?
Through the chair to Councillor Dean, absolutely. Accepting the budgets at next council meeting is in no way locking council with no changes available. Generally, it is common practice, once we receive the assessment data in early March, then we can actually run our forecasts and look at what the true reality of the municipality is based on the assessment data received and the taxation rates, and looking at that in conjunction with budgets. And absolutely, there is that opportunity before the tax rates are set for 2022 to open up budget discussions.
Okay, thank you. And I just, to council, I want to reiterate that I understand and respect the strategy, and I think it's proving to help get the county back on the financial footing that we want to have. I just want to make it clear that there is that opportunity, so.
Yeah, and Councillor Crestage?
When we did the 5-year strategy, we were in dire straits.
Right.
We still are in dire straits. This 5-year program was to get us out of that position we were in. Changing it midstream is not going to help anything. When you set a 5-year plan, stick to it, because that's the plan that we can see where we're going to come out of it. Changing it midstream is going to defeat that.
Again, we'll have a conversation as we go through it, but and that's kind of been the way that I've been trying to hold that 5-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that we're still in pretty uncertain times. So we're trying to maintain I had something I was going to say there, and then I lost my train of thought. But we have suffered. What is it, 12.5, it's about 12.5 million in uncollected revenue in the last 3 years. And our operating budget is only sitting around, what, 18 million total?
Yes, Mayor Rose, that is correct.
So, we nearly lost a year's worth of revenue in the last 3 years. Part of what we're trying to do, certainly on the reserve part, when we talk about that $10 million reserve, because of the way our year ends work, taxes are due, June 30th? So our spending year begins January 1st. We need enough money in the bank to run us through until June 30th, which is when the tax collection is. If we don't have that cash sitting in the bank, then we're on finance charges. So, that's been one of the things that I've continually wrestled with, is the last thing I want to do is send any taxpayer money to a financial institution. And if we can build that operating reserve back up, then at least we're operating on cash, and that's been number one priority. So that, just so that I get the strategy out for the new council, that's one of the biggest things, because if we don't have that built up and we do not increase the taxes, well, then we'll end up spending money on finance charges and everything else, and we'll start sliding backwards. So it's just a component that I want everyone to be aware of, that that's something that we had talked about, because the overall financing of the organization is kind of it just operates a little differently.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions to Alicia?
So diving into the expenditure side of the operating budget, managers were tasked to find efficiencies from within the department budgets, and administration is committed to that process. All cost of living increases for staff wages, which is awarded prior to elections in 2021, have been absorbed within the current budget and did not cause us to exceed the 1% allowable increase. Budgets printed and as circulated reflect to council 0.43% decrease in overall expenditures. And we have, at the end of the presentation, administration is going to seek clarification and direction from council on bring it up to a full 1% increase in the expenditures would be an additional $445,000, which we would like to place in a contingency fund. There's a number of items that we need to look at during the 2022 year, perhaps a census, increased internet connectivity for this building is a huge priority, and we don't have any idea of costs for that right now. So just wanting to make council aware that as printed and as reviewed, we are at a 0.43% decrease, but we will be in the final documentation with council's approval looking to bring it up to that full 1% increase in expenditures to allow for that contingency. So if everyone can flip in their binders, let's see if I'm ambidextrous here and can do this. The first page of your binder is a single sheet which will clearly identify at the bottom for you that we are showing you a balanced budget. The zero in the surplus deficit column is confirmation of that. That's the starting point, with assurance to council that this is a balanced budget. Flipping over one page, you will see a report titled 4 Zeros Ops Budget Seating. The really quick way to look at this one and to think about it is every department that you see, for example, we have safety in brackets 136,940. That's essentially the amount of taxpayer revenue we are utilizing to run that particular function in our organization. So this is just a quick glance to let you all see, as we go through the budget, what we're looking at drawing from taxation to continue operating these functions and departments. On page 2 of 5 of that section, no, I'm gonna lie, on page 3 of 5 of that section, you will see a confusing line at the top where it says 30 common services. That's a combination of everything 30, so roads and airport. So don't be confused that it's on the previous page saying $12 million operating budget for common services, and then you're seeing 13 million there. That's a total. And that also happens a little farther down the page on utilities, where you see 40 utilities. That's the overall water, sewage, and solid waste, everything combined together to give an overall view of that function. Any questions on this report, as you all had an opportunity to review it prior to the meeting?
Sorry, one question there, Alicia. This is probably just because where we are in the accounting year, but we'll say, just for example, Fording Utilities, it has basically 1.2 budgeted for 2021, and that's 784. That difference is just because of the accounting portion for the year, or?
Absolutely, there are some entries that still haven't been made before the year end.
That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask one question too. Certainly something that we've been hearing a lot on the news lately is the rate of inflation. I think we're at an 18-year high on inflation. What is the current rate? Is it 4 or 5%? Somewhere around there.
Through the chair and rest of council, the last article I read on it was about 4.8%
Okay.
for inflation. And we have tried to absorb all of those increases that the county is going to be faced with within that 1%. So we have looked for efficiencies in every corner of the organization.
And I'll ask you one more question too. So on last year's budget, and we haven't quite completed it yet, but I think the year before that we had underspent on our budget. Is that correct? My point is, in a more general sense, that when council looks at the budget and they see a number allocated to a specific area, the mentality that a lot of people deal with in government is, well, we got to spend that money or we're not going to get it again next year. And that is not the mentality that administration is dealing with right now. You're looking to drive as hard a bargain as you can, but make sure that the operation's funded. So there's...
That is correct,
Right.
Rose. The culture and the attitude that we're reinforcing with all of the departments is if it's unspent, it can go back into the surplus or the contributed, and we re-ask for it in the next year's budget. We are very stringent with our accounting practices, which require goods and services ordered prior to year end to physically be on site in order for us to account for them as a current year expense. And so that in itself prevents some of that last minute bulk ordering that I agree tended to be a historical practice in some organizations.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
So the next tab I will direct you to is under the object code summary. It's a 70-page report, and it's one of my personal favorites for giving an overview of the operations. Quite often when you're having conversations with ratepayers, it may come up that you spend an exorbitant amount in a certain area, and you're able to look through this document and see very easily from all the pages of the documentation, for example, one lump sum for freight. And so it prevents you from having to look through all of the different departments that may or may not have freight costs associated with them, and it gives you a comprehensive number as far as what that particular object costs throughout the county budget. Any questions on that before I move forward?
Mr. Dean?
Through the chair to Alicia, there was a number over here, refund of prior year's taxes. That was the incentive program to have taxes paid by June 30th.
That's part of it, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Dean, that is part of it. There's also a number of properties that we have received we've pursued through legal proceedings and have received awards through the courts for payment of taxes, so we're capturing all of those monies in a single account so we can better track what's coming in and keep on top of the agreements and make sure we follow.
So, how does that apply to a refund then? So if you're collecting taxes that you weren't expecting, how does that become a refund?
Through the chair to Councillor Dean, poor wording on a GL account code heading. And we have a number of those. I have comments from the 32 department that we refer to roads either under common services or infrastructure services, and we should be talking about them as roads. So it is a line, and I will make note of that. We can do some research and change that heading for the upcoming year.
Okay, thanks.
Your worship, if I can supplement that, however, there is, under that line, you do 305 changes. for assessment. And for example, we received one this morning from an MGB hearing that one of the oil companies got a reduction in their assessment. So they'll pay ahead with the understanding they don't want that penalty. And then we end up, once we know those changes, we then end up refunding, so.
Okay.
And 305 changes occur in the industrial, I would say monthly.
Thank you.
So the next tab in the binder is labeled general, and under that you simply have your page for the composition of property taxes, interest on monies, penalties on uncollected accounts, and as well as outstanding taxes that we're pursuing through other courses of action. Legislative services. I can switch to the computer. So this is essentially council's budget. And again, as with the rest of the organization, there was a 1% increase to expenditures allocated for this particular area. You have your base honorarium for mayor and councilors. There was also through the remuneration policy, there was decided upon a couple of years back that there would be a little bit of a professional development fund set up for council that would allow them to pursue special areas of interest or maybe take extra training for items that are specific to their region that they represent. And the reason for the little asterisks beside those two connecting them is some of the conferences that you would go to, such as RMA or potentially FCM, then we also have the ability to utilize some of your funds from the professional development fund. So it's not and we work on them in conjunction of the additional honorariums and the professional development. Any questions on the legislative budget?
Don't see any. Keep going.
And administration general, which is the next tab in your binder. And I'm just wanting to bring to council's attention on page 1 of 1, where it shows the expenses $10,644,000. I want to bring to council's attention that included in that $10 million is where we have identified the capital project costs for this year at this point in time, the carry forwards from 2021, the $3 million allowance for bad debt, and the $1.2 million that we have identified as transfers to reserves. The reason why those capital projects costs will get allocated throughout into the capital budgets once they're all identified and set up. But since 2019, 2020, we've attempted to streamline the presentation to council, and by identifying some of these large items that we want to be sure brought to your attention are in one section and easily able to be found, and so far I feel it's working, and so we continue that for this year. Also under general administration, I'll invite Kara to come up. We just wanted to identify that we're showing new revenue under this area. And I'll let her carry on from there.
Good morning, your worship, members of council.
Morning.
So this slide is just showing you received a $40,000 grant from FCM to continue on with our asset management. And you'll see that in your budget binder, page 1 of 9. Your grants, there's the additional $40,000 there. And then as well on page 2, for contracted services, there's $142,000. So that's where the expenses should come. So it's pretty much an in and an out for that. And so our focus this year is gonna be collecting the condition assessments for all of our culverts and finishing on the roads, bridges.
Any questions? Nothing. You can cheerlead for asset management.
Thank you, Tara. We have joining us, I believe, by Teams, our manager of protective services, Mr. Scott Webb, and let him move forward here with some discussion on the safety fire. Is Scott available?
Good morning, can you hear me?
Ooh. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, Your Worship and Council. With regards to the safety budget, will be the standard 1% increase. There will be a cost savings with our safety software that we've evaluated, and it should be approximately a savings of close to $5,000 once everything is said and done with our safety budget.
Scott will just briefly touch on our intermunicipal, and then I'll invite you back to go over the emergency and fire protection and the other areas of your budget. Okay?
Okay.
So our next tab under the intermunicipal services has been and still is some unknowns in these budget lines for this year. The second, or my slide here, let's get to it. Indicates the current composition that administration has brought up, and I see the slide did not save. There's an error on that slide. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's correct. My apologies. The White Court cost share at 900,000, police services at 500,000, potentially transfer to reserves of 1.2 million, so that would be in addition to the other monies identified under the administrative line. And we still anticipate some arbitration costs to reach this point. So that is the composition that we have come up with. So no increase in this one from last year, and these monies, until we have some decisions, will be sitting on our financial statements and going through audit as if being payable. So recognize them as a liability that potentially the municipality faces. And I took out the slides on emergency management. There was no changes in that, so we can, unless there's questions from council on emergency management, which you can direct to Scott, I'll invite you all to look at the fire services tab. And I will turn it over to Mr. Webb, and he can let me know when I should be advancing slides.
Councillor Dean, you have a question?
Through the chair to administration, the protective services summary, what is captured in those costs? What are those services? Is that our contracted services to the bylaw officers, etc.?
Through the chair, Councillor Dean, yes, that's anything that is considered under a 20 code. So fire services, protective services, emergency management, all of them.
The fires.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Webb, go ahead. If you can hear us.
Oh, I can hear you, sir. So the fire services budget, we're 1% increase from 2021. We have a few, so 642,593 would be our budget. We have a few things that we have to complete this year. For Assiniboine and Blue Ridge fire halls require new lights. We need to repair the unserviceable ones. We would like to change them to the LEDs, which would help us with our electricity costs. and these maintenance costs should be absorbed within the 1% expenditure increase. With reduced remuneration costs due to the record reduced number of members in our halls, and training and gear costs reduction with the reduced membership as well. Any questions?
Yes, Councilor Lucan.
Yeah, through the chair to Scott, I have a bit of a struggle with, we have 4 fire departments, and it's obvious that there's 2 of them that are more active than the other 2, and I'm a bit concerned about the ongoing capital, wages, and all of those things. And because I don't understand probably, what the call out is, what the training is, and all of those things, my question would be, are we looking at continuing this if the recruitment is less in some of these fire departments, the training maybe isn't there so that they're not responding? Because I think down the road, we're going to have to identify that these are fire departments that are able to respond because they're trained to the service level that we're required. And I'm a bit concerned that we're paying exactly the same money to those fire departments for the fire chief and the deputy chief and the officers if they're not able to be actively responding. So I'm just wondering if we could get some extension on those numbers, the calls, the training, to understand whether these fire departments are going to continue to be viable. Because I think that if we're going to continue paying for these, then we have to have a strategy that says they're trained to scope, they're able to respond, and they're not just there eating up some of the capital and operating money.
Through the chair to council, I can work those numbers. Yes, I can. It'll take me a little bit, and I have been going through the training program personally, and just from my experience right now, that our fire departments are very well trained. We do have a lot of little junior members that need some training. We need to bring them up to standard before we can put them into that hazardous atmosphere. But yes, I will gladly pull some numbers together for you and have something here for you to present.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Webb. Any other questions? And this first budget's always tough on the new council too, because we're having the budget conversation before the service level conversation, just because of the timing. So, Mr. Frank.
Yeah, just to supplement Mr. Webb's comments in regards to the question is, and I'm just trying to find it in your budget package, you actually do have each fire department broken down, and under, I'm trying to find the one that, under salary and wages for the Port of Assiniboine Hall, that's where you would look for the honorarium portion and how it's contributed to each department and what they've actually spent to date, the A 2021. So that does give you some indication and definitely can provide that. The other note that I should provide, and I made a note of it, is 4 years ago, Woodlands County did a fire service review in regards to the best way to look at delivering fire services in the future. And that's one of the things that I'll provide with council. It is dated a little bit. However, one of the recommendations is to do a fire master plan that would then, again, deal with the service levels at the same time, so.
Councillor Kush?
Just through to Councilor Coughlin, just want to, for an example, we got talking about the, I guess, honorariums between a couple of them. The fort up in, I guess, honorarium for the fort, Cinnamboyne budgeted 2021 was 70,000. And Salmo, which isn't as busy, honorarium is only budgeted 24. So they're definitely not throwing the same money at every hall.
Any other question? Okay.
Oh, I have my slides out of order. Sorry, Scott. So we did have a slide in here for emergency management. There is no changes. Is there anything that you would like to elaborate on with emergency management?
No, sorry, I'm just jumping between software here. Yeah, so there's no addition to the emergency management budget. Everything looks good, and I believe that we're with the emergency management budget with our new committee in that this year. We'll be in good shape to host what we need to host for our exercises and in-person training. Did you want me to carry on with patrol services?
Yep, I'm just catching up with the slides. You got to take it away.
Patrol services budget, there is no change from 2021 to the 2022 budget. Still currently $96,550. Our current allocation is 80 hours per month. Utilizing the local dog catcher periodically, budget allocation required. Assist planning and development with bylaw enforcement. This is what we've had our patrol services help with our planning and development group. And 2022 is the third year of the agreement signed in January 1st, 2020. A full review of this program is to be done in 2022. I know a little bit about the agreement. I would actually, if for questions on the agreement, I would have to ask Mr. Mr. Frank to expand on that.
Do we?
Did you want to expand on it?
Your worship, members of council, you have a contracted agreement that provides 1 year notice to Lac St. Anne if you choose to do something different with the delivery service for patrol services. Like Mr. Webb indicated, it is for 80 hours, and which is essentially a half-time person. And my understanding is, and again, they'll react to any situation. However, they do regular patrols and they work it with the county of Barrhead, go up to the Fort of Cinnamboyne area, come down into our area, or vice versa, come across in El Selmo and work their way up through in the county of Barrhead, because they have also a half-time position. So from that perspective, it works operationally well. From my conversations with the sergeant with patrol services with Lac St. Anne, I have had conversations in the past with the CAO at Lac St. Anne, and if council does want to increase that service, it would go from a half position to a 1.5 position, because the other half of this position is presently with the county of Barrhead. So he's indicated that they just can't do another half position, they'd have to do a full position. So.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. I will invite invite Richard Track to come up, and he will be able to answer any and all of your questions on infrastructure services. It's a lengthy-ish budget, but under your tabs, you do have a full summary page, and then a breakout giving some details on all of the different functions and services offered by the company. We have a few slides, but I know that I got a little heavy-handed in editing last evening, so Rick probably has some additional information that he would just like to share with you, so I'll turn it over to him.
Okay, I am going to work off my phone, I might be able to read that. So we have, it's showing here, okay, it's showing the 4% reduction, where we had a 1%, so there must have been some other changes.
When I took the amortization, which is a non-cash item, out of final numbers when we were generating the budget, this portion of the organization did have a larger decrease than others, but you will see also under the infrastructure umbrella, if you will, such as utilities and recreation services and the maintenance of the facilities, there are some increases. So overall, everyone stayed within the 1%. We're just showing a decrease here, but there's some increases in other areas.
Okay, so, yeah, again, members of council, we've just highlighted the more significant changes in our budget compared to last year. There's quite a bit more information in this document that we have that you'll be able to look through as well, and if you have questions, bring them up. But we'll start out here, this is our building maintenance, which is throughout the county. We've got a reduction of the construction materials, and that's just based, going back on the average in the past, that we didn't need to dedicate that much money and not use it, so we've reduced that. And electric power as well. We've noticed we keep budgeting quite a bit, and these increases that they talk about aren't seeming to be as significant as what they say, so we have wheeled it back, but we're still above the average yet for, if there's an increase, we should be able to cover that as well. Going into the brushing here, we actually have an increase. We're looking at, we did, I don't know if you guys have seen, we have a track hole that we have a mulching head on it that we've been able to go along. We started clearing some right-of-ways and ditches and stuff like that. So we did some there last winter, but this year we're looking at doing more of a full-time mulching program during the winter when you can get into some of the softer areas. So we've actually increased that budget a bit.
I just got one question from Councilor D.
Sorry, through the chair to Rick, can you come back to that electrical power? The item is called chemical supply.
Incorrect
Oh.
editing last evening.
Yeah,
Okay.
that could have been, yeah, sorry,
Okay,
yeah.
then.
That is the actual electric power.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so, yes, we're actually gonna be looking at doing a fair bit of mulching this winter, hopefully ourselves, with our own equipment. Ditch cleaning, we are looking to, we started a pretty aggressive program last year. We didn't spend nearly what we had expected. So we have reduced it this year, but this is still gonna be hopefully more than what we did this past summer. We call it ditch cleaning, but that's also includes basically re-ditching. So taking a hole and truck and re-establishing our ditches. It's not really ditch cleaning where you might think of picking garbage and such. Contracted services, that would be, which tab is that under? 63?
You had it in two places.
Oh,
One
that'll
was
be,
under snow
okay,
removal.
that'll be, yeah, I got it. That'll be for the grading. And this is something we're looking at starting this year. As opposed to replacing graders with purchased graders, we're gonna try leasing a couple graders this year. So that is a definite increase from not having done this before. And we've made up that money elsewhere in the budget.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
so how long is that lease? Is it a 5-year lease or?
Through the chair, Councilor Dean, that is a 5-year lease
5?
on 2 graders.
Okay, and can you give a ballpark of lease cost versus the life of a grader? So if a grader costs $100,000 and you expect it to last for 10 years, that cost per year to be $10,000, but,
Through the chair to Councilor Dean, graders run 450,000. Typically, municipalities keep them for 5 years, send them down the road.
okay. So that 105 multiplied by 5 would be 525, so there's a bit of extra cost extended over the 5 years.
That's right, basically you're financing that unit through the dealer.
Okay, and the warranty extends through the life of the lease?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Those are actually full-service leases, so they do all the maintenance and servicing on them as well.
Okay, so those costs would have been absorbed by the county if you owned the grader? Okay.
Councilor Prestige.
These are, we just sold 2 graders because we didn't need them. So now we're leasing 2 graders?
We'd be selling 2 others of
Through the chair to Council Prestige, so leasing 2 graders will replace 2 of the remaining 5 that we have. And then we'll dispose of 2.
So we're not replacing the 2 that we just sold.
That's correct, replacing 2 others.
Anyone else? Okay, continue.
The next tab there, 53, is culvert repairs. We've reduced that again based on our historic averages there. We did have a pretty busy year for culverts. We noticed just with the spring breakup that quite a few separations, you might have heard complaints or seen issues on the road where there'd be a sinkhole just in the road. It's more than I've seen over my history of being here, but when the culverts pull apart at those joints, you'll end up getting washout and then you end up with a sinkhole in the middle of the road. Any one we had this year was at a culvert, and we had more than most years, large culverts especially. And I think that happens when the road settles, it tends to squish out and it's actually pulling on the culverts, and it tended to pull them apart. We found a few of the culverts we exposed, they had bands that hold the culverts together. There were some like 8 inches, 10 inches maybe. Some we've actually found on large culverts had no bands on them whatsoever. So whatever they were put together, they were just butted up and buried up. So we had quite a few of those showing up this year. That's usually a lot of the sinkholes, if you're gonna see in a hole, is culverts just rolling apart. Re-gravel program. We are reducing our contracted services. From last year's budget, we're gonna be doing more just hauling with our own equipment. We rented a belly dump last year, and those are pretty imperative to have those for working on the power line. So as I understand, we won't be purchasing one, so we'll probably be looking at renting one again for the summer just for the re-gravel purpose. And our gravel usage on the average has gone up slightly, so we've increased the budget for revisions. And sign budgets, once again, based on the average, we've reduced that somewhat. We did have a busy year this year and probably next year for those blue address signs. I know a lot of people get calls about, their signs are faded. I don't have the numbers handy, but we replaced like several hundred this summer. And I think we talked about that before. It's just their lifetime. From when we started, they have an expected lifetime. We're getting to that point. Any of the south-facing ones are pretty much all, and we've been replacing those, and pretty soon the other ones will be getting replaced as well. So that's just an ongoing thing we try to keep on top of. And 75, snow removal. This is the same numbers that showed up in the grading. We've shared the cost of the lease between the grading in the summer and the snow removal in the winter. So that will be for the 2 lease grades for half a year. That's the end of my tab.
That's the end of your slides.
Any questions?
Councilor Coogan.
Through the chair to Mr. Twack. Is there a possibility for us to see what the actual cost of your gravel truck and trailers are and what the costs are attached to your graveling program? Because my experience is that it's I've done a lot of the the contract work, and it's pretty interesting, as I'd like to see those numbers, how those are made from in-house as to what the contracted services are. But I would be more interested in just understanding the actual costs of owning those units as compared to contracting that service out. If that's possible, if we could get some of those numbers, it's very difficult for us to dispute that you're doing it efficiently if we don't have the numbers that would tell us what that actual cost is.
I'm just gonna interrupt for 1 second, Mr. Frank. That's a,
Your worship, through to Councillor Conklin, I understand your question. Just so that council is aware of is, we haven't changed anything in our operational or introduced a new service other than which will be identified in this budget. To do those comparables, absolutely can do. I'm not saying we can't do them. We're just, I would do that in 2022 so that council, as they go into the regular, normal September budget deliberations, you'll have all those all that information ahead of you to make that, if you're changing the service level, right, or to a different service level, right, then you have that information ahead of that, right? To make that decision to go from this budget to within a week, administration wouldn't recommend that.
Mr. Kluken?
Through to Mr. Frank, yeah, I agree, but with that, and that's not what I'm asking for. The reason I'm asking this question is because down the road, we're going to be asked to buy some more capital items that enter into that management strategy, the existing management strategy. And my question is basically directed so that we start to understand this a little better, that maybe we have to change our management strategy. I don't know that, and I can't make those from these numbers, so thank you.
Councillor Kush?
Just kind of following up what Councillor Copeland said also, if we can have a comparison of what, say, a gravel truck costs in-house versus contracting it out, if it's something that we can actually have and show the numbers, and it also gives us information, and we have ratepayers or other businesses asking us, like, say, why we don't use them versus this. If we have the numbers to actually go by, it gives us a little bit more stuff. We can be like, this saves us money doing it this way instead of putting it out, or, vice versa. It's just more of an information thing. It'd be nice to have.
Mr. Frank?
Yeah, your worship, members of council, I fully understand the request or the ask. And again, from a strategic planning, if on an operational review, that's what council wants to do, is look at all the service levels, because I would suggest this is just one of many service levels that you can look at, whether there's efficiencies or comparables, right? Again, that's all we're doing is, yes, absolutely. I'm just saying, if you need it for this budget, very difficult to get that information together, right? I'm saying 2023's budget direction, absolutely can do it.
So just to kind of wrap up or summarize the discussion so that we get this figured out, and I think I can answer what council's saying and what admin is saying as well, but I think this council, once we get into the strategic end of things, want to make sure that one of our strategic components is value for dollar spent. So we're going to be looking at service delivery and service levels and all of these things from a strategic plan end of things. Now, what Councillor Kulkin is saying is that there are some capital expenditures that are coming up on some new pieces of equipment. And if those new pieces of equipment start us down a path that can't be changed for 3 years, that discussion becomes moot. So we want to make sure that if these capital expenditures that are in the program don't take options away from council in changing service delivery. Is that about what we're trying to get to?
Yeah. Mr. Burrows, that's exactly the strategy that I know we aren't gonna change anything for this year. And that's fair because basically the strategy that you have put in place for that 5-year plan is being followed here, and I respect that. It's just that my concern is that, you know, if we start purchasing these items, I think, you know, with respect to Mr. Bashan, they are probably items that need to be replaced and down the road for whatever reason, but I'm concerned that if we don't look at these things, we'll probably, like you say, get something that we may not need. So, yeah, I think the question's been answered for me. Thank you.
Okay.
No additional questions for
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Through the chair to someone in infrastructure, I'm not sure who. Just one line item I'm kind of curious about, not that it, but we spent $48,000 on grader blades. Last year's budget was 80,000. We upped it to 100,000. We knew that much more grading, $50,000 more in blades. Just a question. Seems like 8 of 30. Just seems like we doubled it. Just curious. It's on the top side.
Through the chair, Councilor Williams. So we budgeted $80,000 for this year, we got $200,000. You may recall, council orientation, I mentioned that grader blades, all blades went up roughly 13% about a month ago.
Okay.
Even though it shows we only spent $48,000, we have purchased more since then, so we'll be coming in on budget.
Closer to
But that 20,000 increase is to reflect the increase in blades.
Okay, sir, yeah, thank you. I just seemed like a bit of a uptick, that's all.
Your worship, and just so that, again, the 5-year average on the last, it gives you an indication of what we spent over the last 5 years on an average. So it kind of gives you from a up and down flow, that's typically what happens.
Well, and again, I mean, that's the reason that I mentioned the inflationary cost, because this is gonna be a very tricky time with the amount of inflation that we're dealing with and the supply chain disruption through everything as well. So it's gonna be a weird year.
The culvert prices this year, they went up probably 3 times throughout the year, and they were pretty significant. There was one of the guys here that used to sell culverts, just he couldn't keep up with the changes and the increases in the cost and all that, so he basically sold out of business.
Do we do anything through the RMA culvert trade? Is that how we source them?
Yeah, I think the stuff we went through. Yeah. Okay. With that being said, the person I referred to that went out, we purchased up a bunch of his inventory at prices less than what the current ones were at the time, and the supplier said, you know, you've got a couple weeks until the prices go up again. So we made a pretty good purchase at that time.
Go ahead.
Quick question through chair to Mr. Twack. I see on, sorry, this is probably nitpicking, but item 253, contracted equipment and vehicle, I'm not sure it cuts off, I'm not sure what that line is, but we spent $250,000 this year, or 2021, but we didn't budget anything for this year. Is that gonna be another, if we didn't increase the budget to?
I'll need to see which area.
Which page you on?
Page 7, under common services. Common services ops budget. I just see we spent $250K on something. I'm not sure what that whole line item is, but then we didn't increase the budget this year. Is that going to be an issue? Because we ran, obviously, for contracted services, we ran at a deficit last year. Bottom Oh no, yeah, we budgeted 216 and we spent 360,000. So I just see we didn't increase the budget for that line item, and I'm just wondering what that item's for.
through the chair to Councillor Wilhelm, I will have to get back to you on that. I know overall we are Yeah, I will have to get back to you on that number. There will be a note in my system on that, my apologies.
Yeah, no problem. It was, we don't budget for it, or we don't want it to be a loss again next year, right? So,
Any other questions on the?
that's it.
Need a break?
Did you find it, Rick? Did you see it?
I see it there, and I'd be tempted to say there might be a coding error there, but we
Okay.
budgeted nothing, we spent that $257,000. I'd be tempted to say that probably either shouldn't probably been coded somewhere different than where it showed up here.
Okay.
If that brings us to the end of the infrastructure, are there any other questions on Councillor Coogan?
Yeah, my question just is that, I see you're, in the capital budget, we're doing some crushing again. How is that reflected in, like you have, cost for gravel, in here? Is that, what do we pay per cubic meter of crushing? Is that,
You're asking how much, what the cost of gravel is for us?
yeah,
Depending on the product, you might be down to like 3/4 inch, I think will be somewhere around $5 per ton.
okay.
Or under.
That's for
depending
the actual crushing.
That's what we would pay the contractor to come in and produce that material for us.
Okay, so then whatever we're seeing in this is material that's already been crushed, so this is just this is gonna be something to replace what we're doing in this.
The capital will be when we have the contractor come in, he'll go to the gravel pit, he'll produce, 750,000 tons of varying material for us.
Okay,
If that goes into inventory, the gravel in this, the re-gravel is
Yeah.
going to be the cost of that gravel when we put it onto the road.
okay,
So
okay.
we'll track that.
Anything else on the infrastructure side? Okay, let's take a quick break at this point. We'll, let's come back at,
10:50.
well, we'll make it a 15-minute break, so we'll come back at 11. And then during the break, we can decide whether or not we're gonna plow through this and order a lunch or what we're gonna do. So let's come back at 11. Yep. Okay, everybody. I'll just wait for Nikita. Yes? Okay, we're back from our break, so we left off at airport. I'm gonna turn it over to our airport manager.
Good morning. For the airport services, we are showing an increase of about 6% this year. That's due to the cost of breaking the land that was previously logged a couple years ago. And that cost should be offset by the sale of the timber on the north side of the airport. And then other than that, we are pretty much just operating normal as we always do out there. Nothing special. Any questions?
I'll ask one. We had that piece of equipment that was supposed to, I think we approved it in the last budget, that was for spreading urea.
For chemical, liquid chemical.
Yeah. Did that get purchased?
Yes, it is.
Is that saving us a little bit on urea?
It does much more effective in spreading the liquid throughout where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And so it's a very big time savings. And it gives us a better chance to play with the application rate. So we can get to the point where we can dial in exactly how much liquid chemical we need to use per application.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, that you can't throw salt on a runway because it'll eat through the aluminum in a week. And so that was the question I was asking, is just that chemical spreader.
So, Your Worship, just a follow-up question, I'm more curious on myself is, so are we creating any efficiencies
That's,
with the new piece of equipment?
that was my question.
We've used it once so far this year with the last freezing rain that we had. And so we're still going to do some more fine tuning with it. But there is a very time efficiency with it. With the old one, you would have to travel at 2 to 3 kilometers an hour to get enough coverage. Whereas this one, you can travel at your 35, 40 kilometers an hour and it still gives you the proper coverage. So the liquid chemical is effective.
Your Worship, so what I again heard is you need a full winter season to understand.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on the airport? Wow. Okay.
Now for the utilities, and this includes water, sewer, and solid waste. We've kept it to a 1% increase. The couple different things that we looked at, we kind of tightened our budget with regards to water breaks. Last year we had a few, there just wasn't as many as what we had budgeted for. So hopefully that stays true for the upcoming year. We also had to increase for the cost of water that we, for the supply, which we get out of the airport area. And in the sewer side of things, this is an off year for cameraing. So we reduced the budget there because we won't be cameraing our sewer lines this year. And then the rest of it should be pretty much standard.
Rolling back here. Sorry about this. I'm just catching up now. I see we've decreased, like you budgeted in 2021, 175,000 for salaries for airport services, but next year or this year is only 95,000. Did we lose an employee out there? Would be line item 2-100 salaries and wages under airport services. Which page? Page 1 under airport.
Through the chair to Council Willen, that's line 2-100-121.
It's just under the it would be the summary of that. Yeah, this is where I was looking, so I just see.
What
Yeah.
page?
Page 1, like the summary page.
1 of 12.
Oh, sorry, 1 of 12, sorry.
Okay, so we budgeted 122 in 2001, oh, sorry, 2021. That's the line you're looking at.
Right. Oh,
Right.
sorry, I was looking at the total summary, so that included benefits. but-
So we actually spent to date roughly $60,000, so we reduced that number. We didn't lose any staff, but we redistributed the wages throughout the other airport programs to reflect what we're actually doing.
Okay.
I should
Go
also
ahead.
point out that we did a small reorg within the airport in utilities where we had a full-time airport manager that we lost, and we split that one person into the utilities and the airport. So there's a bit of
Split their
a wage
wages.
saving there.
That answers your question. I had the same raised eyebrow, so, yeah. All right, go back to water. Was there any questions on water? Or nothing? Okay.
Well, Rob,
Just 1 second, Council Prestage?
Did we get all the roofs repaired on the shops and everything this?
Through Chair, to Council President, yes, the airport shop roof was fixed. We have not had any more leaks.
Go ahead, Council.
Sorry, I do have a question on the solid waste summary, just understanding that we show, okay, again, excuse me for being a novice at this, but when it's in brackets under the total expenses, is that actually a profit then? Or a negative expense? Yes.
Go ahead, Alicia.
through the chair to Councillor Wilhelm, in the actual 2021 column, you're showing a negative 359,096. This is through the 2-300 other local governments, so this would be to do with our agreements with the landfill and the regional landfill. So in 2021, there was some adjustments made throughout all of the intermunicipal, and we had to realign. There'd been some overcharging in lines and undercharging, so we will be balancing that one out at year end when we receive the final invoices.
Okay.
So for right now, it would be a false positive because that number will realign to the correct position.
Right.
Okay, the other question I had on this budget was, are we taking into account the increases that we're seeing for the last budget that was presented at the Solid Waste Management Authority meeting?
Through the chair to members and all of council, we received a preliminary budget after this document had been printed, so currently we are slightly higher than the budget that they have presented to us, but I understand that that budget has not been passed at this point.
Right. Okay. Any other questions on solid waste? And don't ask the questions. If you have a question, ask the question. There's no judgment here at all.
Yeah, it's just it's a lot of numbers to understand and trying to make sense of it. Like obviously my first time trying to do something like this. So
This actually reminds me of learning to fly. You don't understand the ground school until you fly the airplane, but you can't understand flying the airplane until you get some ground school. You have to almost do them together. So
chicken and egg thing.
it'll make more sense once we get a little further along. So, okay, go ahead, Alicia.
So we welcome Joan Slowik to front to answer any questions. She'll have a couple areas here, but first off, it will be on family and community support services. So I'm going to turn it to you.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council. So with the community services budget, we've managed to do just a 1% increase, some adjustments within some of the areas. To the Community Services Committee, we just kind of included some information for yourself as to what that entails, as far as honorary mileage of the committee itself, attendance at a conference, membership to the Alberta Parks and Rec Association. And we have this biannual senior appreciation and volunteer appreciation event that we do. Just some various programs. We did some brainstorming, blue sky, strategic discussion last night, and some of these may change up, disappear, whatever you want to call it, and we'll try and put in some new ideas into the process, but of course, keeping within the budget that's been presented. Family and Community Support Services is a provincial funds that we get. It's an 80-20% split, so the county has to put 20% of the funds that we receive towards this as well. The committee reviews those grants to the various community organizations, make application for programming that's through the seniors, adults, and community development. We do have cost sharing with our neighboring municipalities, in particular Barhead, Northwood, and the town of Whitecourt. The portion of the budget also includes a community services manager or coordinator, so wages within this budget as well, and advertising and miscellaneous costs that's made on the budget. Cemeteries. A couple years ago, sorry.
I just think the cemetery tab is kind of jumbled within your book, so you'll have to jump ahead. And it's simply because for a couple years in the budget, cemeteries was listed under 74, and we're working this year to move it back to a 56, what it should be.
Can I ask a quick question about FCSS? We overspent on materials and supplies, but we didn't increase our budget this year for that. Is there a reason for that?
Because we have to stay within the 1%, we have to be more cognizant of what the expenditure was.
Okay.
So if we want to move on to the cemeteries. So budget change here is we obtained a new cemetery. So the Timu Society in 2019 will no longer exist. The province essentially moving a different entity. The county, as the cemetery sits on private land, had to go through a legal process and obtain that. In 2021, we finally got the title to the cemetery. Heather and myself this fall went out and we had a look at and compared with the other cemeteries within our district. And there is an additional request here this year of about $27,400. Some of that would include just general maintenance. Currently, there is no access road into it per se, in which you can see where a hearse has gone in and sunk into the grass area. So we'd like to see an actual road structure that kind of runs up the middle of it. Signage, there is no signage that identifies it as far as from the highway. So we'd like to place signage for Assiniboine, indicating it's 23 kilometers north. We'd also like to, closer to the entrance, indicate signage that turn here, kind of thing. Some ground leveling. It's a very uneven cemetery. A lot of, you can tell that those that have placed plots in there, some of them are heaved. A lot of them are old. A lot of the stones are lifting up and heaved as well. So we'd just like to do some leveling of that and some miscellaneous landscaping. As well as the sign at the cemetery itself does require some maintenance and repair. It's starting to get moss and that growing on it. It is a beautiful cedar sign that just hasn't been maintained over the years. So we'd like to do some maintenance on it. And that is just one of the big asks this year. If council's interested, by all means, it wouldn't necessarily need to be all done in 2022. It can be progressively done, but just, we thought we'd throw it there and see what council's thoughts were on it. We do also provide annually to our other cemeteries in the area, $1,500 towards, grass maintenance and general maintenance of the cemetery.
Any questions? Mr. Frank, you
Yeah,
got
just to supplement the, Joan's comments is, this is a new ask, so this is money that we are proposing to take from the 3% increase of taxes.
Councilor
This is,
Wilhelm?
through the chair to admin. So this is 5056 cemetery summary, correct? So I'm trying to understand the numbers. So the 6,000, that's what we typically would put in every year? That's right, okay. And then the 27,158, that's your ask, additional ask, is it? Okay. We don't get any revenue from the cemeteries like that?
If I may, through the chair to Councilor Willem, we have got a bylaw in place in which we do sell the plots. They're $300. We've also included a perpetual care fee of $75 on each plot that is sold. So yes, there is revenue that will be coming in. For 2021, we did sell 3 plots this year.
Mr. Frank?
Yeah, again, Mr. Chairman, members of council, for council's information, and we don't typically budget for any unknown revenue, and because we don't know how many plots we could sell or potentially get or people purchase, therefore we use it as zero, and then any additional revenue that is in that given year, it's put into general revenue. So if we know the known money that is coming in, we budget for it. If we don't know how much, we don't budget for it.
Go ahead,
That's
Councilor
one more
Wilhelm.
question. This is just in general to everybody, but to admin as well, please. So when we're reviewing this, and again, obviously this is the first time I've ever done this, and as council, we're supposed to look through and highlight items that we have questions about. Is it typical for us to do this at the point where like the actuals for that year have not been actually seen? Because we don't, how as a council would we ever know if we've actually like highlight areas of concern for ourselves when we don't have the actuals full total year money? Like, does that make sense? Does my question make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and unfortunately, that's the system that we're working in a little bit, is that we can't get an actual at this point because we're not done the year yet. So we don't have everything completely wrapped up, and that's why, like in the past, we didn't do quarterly reporting, we do now, so we work our way through the budget, and Alicia's been very good at presenting us with a quarterly report. We have an idea whether we're on, we're off, we're over on some, under in others. They can show us where, how the year is shaping up, and a large part of that is how we were alerted to 2019 as well, to the big problems that we ran into in 2019. And there was a huge, that was what, third quarter adjustment? Or fourth quarter?
That was about halfway through, right?
Because I think it was a third quarter of adjustment of $3 million in spending. It was crazy. Like it was administration deserves a lot of credit for that one. But that's the reality of this that we're looking at, and that's why a lot of the budget and the actual for 2021 is in there, because the actual for 2021 is in stone. It's audited. It's done. Correct?
2021 is the year we're actually finished.
I'm sorry. Yes,
2020.
I'm trying to think the year prior.
So in this report, your 5-year actual average would be a good measurement point to seeing. It was important to us this year, to administration this year, to have the 5 years showing, because the last couple of years have been a bit of an anomaly for some of the operations with COVID and everything, so we wanted, previously we'd had 3 years, but this year we have the 5 years just to get away from just only having COVID years in there. It is also, from an administrative point of view, important that we have a budget to begin the year with in January, so that managers can go out in any tendering or any new contracts that they want to look at, they know that they're able to with the budget. And then you see the end of the first quarter report in March, and as we move through the presentation of the audited financial statements, that all happens around the point in time when we're setting the tax rates. So there's a lot more clarity as far as exactly how we ended this year in 2021 and how that relates to the budgets that you adopted prior to.
Okay, yeah, and it just, I'm just trying to understand the procedure and what my role, or my best role as a counselor is to be involved with this. So I'm just trying to understand the data that we do have, so that, not that I'm questioning anything, I just want to know how it works.
Councillor Kulkin?
Yeah, through the chair to administration. So in March is when the assessment is we get the assessment. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Kukin, or Culkin, sorry. Yes, the audit, the assessment data is presented, and it must be completed and submitted to the province, and it's reviewed by a provincial assessor. And that has to happen by the end of February, and then we generally receive it the first part of March. We take the time to go through, put it in our system, and then we begin testing and balancing rates of taxation.
Okay, so that's when we set our mill rate. Okay, good. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
So we can go move into 61 planning and development. So here we've got the 1% that we're trying to retain. Wages and benefits, I saw a slight decrease for I had the 8-year, 10-year development officer, and subsequently hired a new gentleman, so a little bit of a decrease there in the wages. Contracted services, increase there, so I won't call it carry forward, but there's 60,000 in the 2021 budget that wasn't used. So just rebudgeting it, looking at doing an airport vicinity protection plan / ASP. Part of the requirements, I think that are needed just to ensure that the area doesn't overgrow the airport itself, and to make sure that planning is done properly within the area and doesn't detriment future expansion of the airport.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Dean.
Through the chair to Joe, can we come back to the contracted services on the summary page? So what I'm seeing is the 5-year average is 264,701. We budgeted just short of 260,000, but we only spent 87 so far.
And that's, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Dean. The 60,000 we didn't utilize last year. Really, there was another 40,000 for flood plain maps that we've been waiting on since 2012. Just with respect to the study that the town, we did our study. It was finalized with civil engineering. The town study is in its final stages, so we're still waiting to get our final mapping with that program. So this money's just, I rebudgeted each year in the hopes that we do get to actually spend it.
So that's approximately 100,000, you said about 60 and about 40. but we had budgeted, so that would bring, if we spent that money, that would bring our actual up to 187-ish, but we budgeted 260.
Your legal is in there,
Sorry?
your legal services is
Oh,
in that
legal
total.
services as well, that's correct, yes. Legal services, is roughly 75,000 there, and that's to do with, an ongoing case at the airport. As well as, what else was there? I think last year. We finalized the aerial photography, that was 100
A little less than that.
And you have high advertising costs because of your requirements, which is also in that
That's in
contracted
contracted
services.
services. So our advertising, of course, we've got to do for, all of our land use amendments, all the development is all advertised as well.
So you anticipate between now and the end of the year spending more money in contracted services?
Mm, Well, a bit more in the advertising end of it, and of course our legal end. As far as the airport, or the AVPA that had been budgeted for last year, no, we just don't have opportunity. It's only been up discussions with the airport committee as to exactly what the nuance in there.
Okay.
And again, the mapping, as far as the floodplain mapping, nothing in the near future. Keep prompting them, but getting put on hold.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Keep going.
As far as the planning boards go, the planning commission, the subdivision development appeal, High Valley area structure plan committee, and the subdivision and development appeal board. A couple years ago, we adjusted those. Had 24 essentially scheduled in the MPC meetings. We've down that to 12. It's actually been quite effective. We still maintain our first and third Wednesdays are open in the event that we do need it, but we do alternate back and forth between those two dates to cover the municipal planning commission and any applications that come through that need to be dealt with through them. SDAB we haven't had, it wasn't utilized last year, that board. The Five Valley wasn't utilized last year either, so we found those essentially in half. The SDAB, of course, is another board that it's, met as necessary, so. But however, the training has increased because we've got new members, and it is legislative training that's required to sit on that particular board. As well, for board training, MPC council, we have, would like to contract Brownlee LLP to do a planning 101, which is scheduled hopefully for January 20th of 2022, to give an overall review of the planning process and the legalities of it all. Boards and contracted services, that decreased by 25,000, and again, that was that's legal. The SDB and the NPC, again, as a result of a case at the airport, has been removed from that process. So there won't be as much legal required as with respect to those two boards. That's it.
Any questions? Mr. Frank, you got supplement?
Yeah, your worship, members of council, just again, for the new councilors, this is another one where the SDAB, for example, is, we don't anticipate any appeals. However, we do make in the budget allowances for expenditures in the event that it does occur. If there is a rush of them, we would then further come back to council depending on how how long we are in the expenditure process to see if we can absorb that in our existing planning department or come back to council for authorization for further expenditures.
And everyone's familiar with the SDAB
Oh, yeah.
component of it, the subdivision appeal board? Yes?
I'm on it, but I haven't taken over.
So you basically make a development application to the municipal planning committee. The municipal planning committee decides one way or the other. Then there's an SDAB, the subdivision appeal board. And so based on outcomes at the municipal planning commission, you don't know whether there's going to be appeals or not. That's the difficult part to budget for. So is that a fair summary? Okay.
There's no other questions for planning and development or on the community service portions. We'll invite Don Fortman to speak on the agricultural services.
Good morning, council. So, for the ag services budget, before we take into account all our new grant funding and allocations required, we do have a 7% increase, but at the end of all of those reallocations and the grant funding, all that kind of stuff, will be at a 0.3% increase with our budget overall. So, pardon me. As you can see, for the grants, we have in 2022 an increase of about $35,000. That was due to the fact that we didn't have our resource-based funding for the Ag Service Board grant accounted for in 2021. They just kind of messed up. I'm not exactly sure what the process was, but it was delayed for some reason. So we didn't have that accounted for in 2021. So we have accounted for that in 2022. And then also with the Mountain Pine Beetle grant, we're anticipating a reduction in that due to the fact that we have some funds that we can carry over to this year from the previous year's grant. So we don't have as much coming in from that grant. Basically with the Mountain Pine Beetle grant though, what we have available is what we're going to spend. We won't be spending more than what we have available in grant funding for that program. So that's going to be a big increase, but in the end, it's not going to, it's going to be a balance out kind of an issue. So moving on to our chemicals for our roadside spraying program. We have a decrease in the budget for that due to the fact that we have some inventory left over from our chemicals, or in our chemical stock. So we're not gonna, I didn't budget to purchase as much chemical this coming year, so that we can use up some of that chemical stock. For our weed inspections, we have a decrease in our staffing, so we were down one summer student, so I decreased that in the weed inspections program. And then lastly, with our pest control, our insect control, I guess it is, we have that reduced cost for the Mountain Pine Beetle survey and control based on that grant that we're applying for. That's it. Everything else is pretty much status quo.
Councilor Wilhelm?
Just under grants and transfers, what is the transfer of $56,000 as an expense?
Through the chair, Councilor Will, that would be the transfers from our previous amounts of grant funding that we had. We just put it into like I want to call it a reserve, but it's not a reserve fund.
Deferred revenue.
A transferred or deferred revenue fund, and then that gets carried over into the next year.
Okay. So we budgeted to do that. So in the last couple of years, then we've had 25,000 like carried over continuously type
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, so this past year, we had 25,000 to carry over into, the next year's funding program.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you, Don.
We'll invite Mr. Roach up to speak on economic development.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My pleasure to be here in front of you today. The economic development budget was had a chance to be analyzed by our economic development committee back in November. So we do have some input from the committee that's gone into the budget that's in front of you today as well. It does align very well with the existing strategic plan and with the information that we had that came out of the strategic plan we did for the economic development committee going back to January of this year. It does allow us full participation in the business support networks, our area chambers, the Growth Burrito and Wild Alberta. So we've got all that stuff covered. And then these are the changes that are in front of you. This year we had a very successful new program that we worked closely with communications with, and Nikita and our volunteer judges did a great job of selecting some photo winners for our photo contest. So we have that as a new item. We also had, through the course of our meetings this year, the economic development indicate that it would be a priority that we put aside $150 for 3 youth development permits. So that's the $450 expenditure there. And we also have committee direction making sure that we have a new event that is in Edmonton this year related to energy transition. Of course, Alberta itself is doing a hydrogen hub. So in hydrogen conference, we've got an allocation there for a staff member to attend. And Councillor Prestich, our chair, has indicated he may also look at attending that on behalf of the county. So to accommodate for all of that, we do have some changes that are there. They're all listed, and here to answer any of the questions you may have.
Go ahead, Councillor Dean.
Through the chair to Bert, this 5-year average, it shows 0, and if you total those numbers, it's about 340,000. Why is that a 0?
So we did have some changes over the course of the last 5 years, in part due to the pandemic on some of the funding and some of the things that we've done. But really the big change was an organizational change that came when we did the pullout from the Whitecourt Woodlands Tourism. And I think it's been moved to another department as to how we finance for the Forest Interpretive Center. So that was where, since I started in 2018, we have seen the operational funds kind of go down, but I think that's where most of that sort of lifts from. Does that sound correct?
Go ahead, Alicia.
Well, through the chair and all council, the 5-year average column is showing 0 all the way through, simply because that's an indication that it was the balanced year, it was finalized, there was no unaccounted for any surpluses or deficits or anything to be accumulated, if I'm reading your question correctly.
Yeah.
On that one. I do notice that there is a formatting error on this page that I need to correct. It's just we haven't got the revenue line totaled, but it is running through correctly. So there is some formatting that has to be done on the page, but the 5-year average on all of the pages is 0 because it's complete data. It's the year end.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Waldham.
Through the chair to Mr. Bert, please. I see the 5-year average on line item 2300 is $123,000. Is that just like in the past have we spent $120,000 on that?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilhelm, Mr. Roach has the unfortunate or fortunate ability is his budget has had some interaction with the intermunicipal transfers, and so the contracted, or the 2-300, the other local governments. So that would have been previous initiatives that we would have partnered with, maybe the WWT and some of the other items that we're going through. So the GL is just picking up all of those transactions that are going through. We've since, for clarity purposes, tried to move as much of all of that into the 215 or the intermunicipal cost share. So hopefully in another year or two, there'll be more clarity around that. But these are initiatives that are showing up in the 5-year average that were at one time under the economic development, but maybe your programs that have ceased or have been moved to another area.
I have a follow-up question. So most of these areas are seeing a 1% budget increase for a year, but you don't have a 1% budget increase on yours. Is that a strategic reason?
No, there should be the 1% if you take a look at the slide presentation. On slide 45, we have actually increased from the 226,398, which was in 2021, to the 228,661. So that should be the total expenditure for this year. And we did have some inflation within the budget on a number of things. Part of it was that wages and some of the other services and that sort of thing. But that I think has all been addressed as a whole within the budget.
My math must be.
Councillor Kuchen.
Yeah, just to, through the chair to Mr. Roach, just a question. There's been an indication by Westlock that they're going to not participate in RETA. And I'm just wondering if that's going to have an impact on our budget as to what we will have to do to continue in that participation.
Thank you for that. I think that's an excellent question. The RETA funding model, the way that it's set up, we participate in the RETA based on a per capita fee. So we do have that $7,800, which would be our Woodlands County cost for participating. That is priced in and is available for the budget for this year. We know that it's been a difficult year for the RETA. We may see another number or two indicate that they might be on the fence or might be in. We're certainly waiting for that next RETA meeting to be held with bated breath. And that's certainly something that, as our rep to the RETA, we can certainly work on and addressing together. But our county participation is ensured. Our funds are budgeted for 2022. They shouldn't change as it is a per capita cost.
Thank you.
I have one last question.
Councillor Wilhelm.
To the chair, to Mr. Roach. What will we have amortization on an ACDEV group?
That is an excellent question, and I'm going to pass that through myself to Alicia.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilhelm, this is, and we've been working behind the scenes quite significantly in 2021, working on our fixed asset system, part of our accounting software. My guess at this point is going to be that it has something to do with some assets in the FIC because it was a joint venture at one point in time.
Okay.
So we are, we're watching that. If the amortization is a non-cash item, so even though it's not budgeted for and you're seeing it in here, we will be strengthening all of those numbers, and if there's amortization from some assets that we found, we will be budgeting, but it's an in and an out, so it doesn't have a impact on the financial.
On the budget, okay.
Asks, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Roach.
Thank you, and just one last item to mention, and it does kind of coach into what Alicia has mentioned. One of the other significant groups where I play a strong liaison role and where we have Councillor Dean as a representative as well as for the Golden Triangle. And that organization is, I shouldn't say organization, it's a 6-way municipal partnership. And those funds are not in the ECDAV budget proper, but they are in the funds that were moved over for the joint cost sharing. But the indication at our Golden Triangle meeting is all partners are very much interested in continuing status quo with that group as things are moving along. So that was just, that's really the biggest item that my actions are sort of related to, but it isn't reflected in the budget right now with the way that we've made our change.
And I'm going to hit on a couple of things. So that organizational change that happened in 19, right?
Correct.
There were a lot of things that were contained under economic development that were joint or tourism or other types of initiatives that were, at the time, I don't think they were very representative of economic development as the way it stands. They just kind of got funneled into that particular portfolio. What we tried to do in the reorganization is make sure that the economic development department is well represented, that it's a cost that's captured and that it's broken out of the budget in a much more understandable way, because there was a lot of things that were lumped in. That was a huge budget. It was huge, and it had very little to do with economic development by the way that council understands it now. The second part I'm going to touch on, all your BSN memberships are in here, correct?
Correct. So with the BSN, we actually don't have an annual membership fee, but we do have an allocation of basically $1,000 for each of the 4 BSNs. Now, classically, what's happened is the BSN meetings are held as an in-person meeting, and we've been, in the past couple of years, been able to basically end up being a meeting host and buy lunch or that sort of thing. The 4 BSNs are for the 4 communities of, we have Fox Creek, Whitecourt, Mayorthorpe, and Barhead. And so those 4 municipalities and the related business communities align very well with the economic arrows that flow in and out of Woodlands County. So we do have the allocation of about $4,000 towards the BSNs in total. And we have the albertabsn.ca website. And there are maybe some other possibilities to look at an online platform or some different things with some of that money this year. But that $1,000 for each of the 4 BSNs is in the budget as it's presented.
And then you have 2 Chamber of Commerce in there too?
We actually have 4 chambers, so we are a platinum member for the Whitecourt Chamber, which I always get this number wrong, but I believe it's about a $1,200 annual expense. But being a chamber member, we do actually receive some organizational benefits as well as just being a part of things and being mentioned on all of the chamber advertising and having our logo on the weekly chamber fan out and all of that. We are also members of the Swan Hill, the Barhead, and the Fox Creek Chamber. And again, it's really part of the strategic plan for economic development is to develop that business retention strategy. And this is really part of it. That gives us years on the ground and the ability to kind of understand on a holistic level what the business communities in each of those 4 communities are facing. And it's a great interface for us to kind of get input and be able to get some input and some conversation back to what's going on with those 4 separate business communities.
Councillor Wilhelm.
One last question through the chair, Mr. Roach. Just to roll back to your slide, you don't have to put it up, but I'd see we'd canceled several events there. Is that just because of the anticipation that they're not going to happen?
So 2 things. One, the budget had to be balanced. So it really did come down to, it was, okay, do we choose this child or this child? And I'm very thankful to the Economic Development Committee for helping make some of those decisions. But there are a couple of organizational changes that are within that as well. So the Whitecourt and District Economic Forum, that is a chamber event that in the past Mayor Burrows has presented at, and we put some extra money and some oomph into. We just didn't have it within the budget, to stay within the 1% to have that on the books this year. Hopefully the chamber is going to have that event, and we'll have to work with them to figure out what our participation and how that part of it would work if we can't come forward as a paying member. The Small Business Week Gala and events, in the past, we've done that as a very large event as well. And 2 years ago, the Chamber actually took over the awards portion of the gala. We did actually used to offer business awards to the Growth Rita as well. So that events gala with the business awards was the venue for us to present the awards coming from the Whitecourt Chamber as well as the award that came from the Growth Rita. So we're not quite sure on the status on that, and that really is kind of a COVID casualty, I would say. And then in regards to the magazine advertising and all of that, that the ad rates for the EDA Investment Alberta magazine are very high compared to the ad rates that we face with a lot of our other advertising. Looking Alberta-wise, or wide, and at the quality and the breadth of that magazine, their ad rates are quite reasonable. But when we can run an entire photo contest internally for around that $2,000 mark, support our residents, generate photos and all of that, versus the cost of having a 1/16th page ad in a magazine that might go to 10,000 outside folks, it was a pretty easy decision for the ECDEP committee.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm sorry for making you go through that. I just wanted council to know all the little bits and pieces and how far outreaching the ECDEV department is trying to reach. So with that, anything further for economic development?
Nope, just thank you for keeping me on my toes.
From council?
Sorry.
Mr. Frank?
Lunch is here, so
Okay, I was just gonna say, we're at that point, so if we're done with the economic development part, we'll go to, maybe rec, I guess.
do you want to go through?
No,
it, or do you want-
we'll flip to that and we'll call lunch at this point, so,
Half an hour?
where are we at? Let's come back at 12:30, yeah. It's an extra,
Till 35 minutes?
yeah. 37 minutes.
Yeah.
We're up. Okay, we're back online streaming again. And where were we? We were at,
Community boards.
yes, community rec boards. Is that Joan?
We'll invite Joan to come and speak on the community rec boards. Oh, I am absolutely working the wrong way. There we go.
That's a strange tab, arts, culture, and cemeteries.
Arts and culture are dying.
Is that like the Dead Poets Society?
Yeah.
Recreation boards, so I couldn't get this edited all on one slide, so there we go.
So we do unfortunately see a 1% increase to expenditures here. essentially just resulting from, changes to, I guess, operations and wages, being included now in this particular area. So what we're looking at in order to maintain, the 1% expenditure increase, to the budget would be, under our operating grants, in which are, various, communities, apply for grants, as we could look at, because we've put maximum amounts within the budget itself. If council's appetite is to keep those maximum amounts, we could look at, decreasing roughly, $6,097 from those particular groups. I know last year, with the COVID, a lot of them didn't make full benefit from the funding. However, if I may, council had also made a motion, because some of the community groups didn't, actually qualify for funding. They did give them a $5,000 COVID kind of relief fund, so to speak, in order to carry them through this, unusual time.
Mr. Frank?
Yeah, your worship, members of council, is everybody aware of our recreation operating grant for our community hall grant? And maybe if you can give them the high-level overview of the grant.
So each year, the community groups, or I'll use a specific hall in particular, they can make application to the county, for some of their operating costs. And it's based on percentage. We also pay a percentage of their insurance costs. If there's any upgrades and things like that that they need, and they need special, contracted services and things like that, they can make application to us and we'll pay a percentage, back to the groups.
And it's always based on the previous year. So if you're looking at 2022, you're actually looking at an audited financial statement for 2020. 2021 or 2020? Because it's always late.
Well, it's always late, yeah.
Yeah,
Because they're paying some utilities and things like that as well, right?
that's correct.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a quick question.
Councilor Wilhelm?
Through the chair to Ms. So we give Fort Assiniboine Ag $110,000 a year?
Yeah, so if I may, through the chair to Councilor Willem, they have got the ice plant. So they've got, a lot more facility there that they look after. So there's the arena in particular, and operations of that facility, and given that they've got the rink and an ice plant and all that stuff that they look after.
Okay. Councilor Dean?
Through the chair to Joan, a couple of questions. Coming back to the operating expenses from Fort Ag, do we have an idea of what the revenue is for the arena and the curling rink? The reason I'm asking is typically it's been my experience that arenas, swimming pools, that sort of thing are subsidized by municipalities somewhere 50 to 60%, somewhere in that ratio, depending on what decisions are made. Is that close, would you say?
That I'm not 100% certain of, to be honest. Definitely something that we can look into to see what that ratio would be.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it. The reason that I'm asking for that, not as, not in an endeavor to reduce funding, but I think it's good for the residents and council to know that if this is typical, if 55% is typical, and we're subsidizing 60%, then it's pretty close. But if we're subsidizing 40%, that's an anomaly, and if we're subsidizing 80%, that's an anomaly as well. The other question I had was with respect to the operating grants. I didn't see the White Clinton District Ag Society listed with an operating grant, unless I missed it there.
That's correct, they're not on this. Yeah, and they do make application to this as well.
for an operating grant. And do you know approximately what their grant would be?
20,000.
22, is it not?
Yeah.
That was 20, yeah.
sounds right.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Counselor Kuchen?
Yeah, through the chair to Joan, and also to Counselor Dean. In the past, there has been some issues of the way that the structure was, that the user groups were actually using it as a place to generate money for their organizations. And I'm just wondering whether there's a way to put a management strategy in place for us to, be able to justify to the rest of the taxpayer that don't use those facilities, that there is a management strategy that says, yeah, this facility has the ability to generate money, and it should be managed in that sense, because I know the curling clubs had bond spiels and all of these things that they generated revenue from, and it never ended up in any revenue stream that you would see. And I think the potential exists as well with the hockey there to manage the ice times and stuff in a little better fashion to generate revenue. And I know there's been some revenue generation done in the baseball diamonds as far as renting camping spots, and I think that needs to be pursued. So these are just some of the things that would address Councillor Dean's concerns, and it would address mine as well.
Keep that in your pocket for the strat end of things too, because I know in even the conversation we had the other night, we were talking about trying to, make sure that there was some confusion around what constitutes capital and what constitutes operating within some of the structures. And again, if we're gonna go down the asset management road, it would be nice to do a little training with some of the facilities and say, well, if this thing's gonna need to be replaced in 20 years, and make sure you're putting some of your operating aside and you've got it for it. And that way, everybody's looking at sustainability and smoothing over some of the bumps in the road. So, Councillor Cush.
Just one quick comment. I mean, we got the proposed reduction of roughly $6,000 across to the groups. I know last year, like you said, basically, or when we had the budget times, like most of the smaller groups with the everything based off the policy didn't qualify for any type of funding, and we were able to help them out. And I just feel that, putting a reduction on there right now, and given that a lot, I know the ag group in my area, obviously this past year has been slow again too, and there's going to be a chance where our policy is going to come back in front of us again to possibly do another kind of assisted help to them. I mean, for the $6,000, I would rather see that in there. Maybe we could move this budget up a little bit. I mean, we've already cut from the groups, and they're already going to be trying to do what they can. If there's something we can do, it's just.
This budget, you're saying there's
Well,
not?
they got on the slide there. She's got a rec to get into the down to the 1% would be a recommended reduction of just about $6,100 coming from the groups, the funding for the groups.
Mhm.
I mean, overall, it's not a big number, but depending on how it plays out for some of those groups, it could end up a little bit more substantial to some than others. And
So that's an overall, that's across the board at 6,000?
I think that's overall from all of total.
Yeah.
I think is.
Your worship, members of council, if again, council decides to, as a whole, decides that they want to put that money back into the budget, all administration did was adhere to the guidelines that were set out by the financial recovery. The money that extra $6,057 would just come from, would reduce your contingency amount. So we would increase the budget, reduce that, and still to continue to have a balanced budget.
Go ahead, Councillor.
And I just also like to point out that, what we have here for the council don't know for the funding available, those are max amounts. It doesn't mean that every facility for what they put in for is going to qualify for those amounts also. But I would like to have the extra funding still there available for them if they can qualify.
I don't know who was first because I was looking that way, so Councillor Wilhelm.
through the chair to Mr. Frank. So, just from my understanding, we've got a contingency amount that we can utilize to adjust the budget. And what is that amount? Maybe that was said before and I didn't hear it. 430.
Through the Charter Councilor Wilhelm, that was, and I believe there's a slide right at the end. I didn't bring my hard copy, I apologize. But right at the start of the presentation, I said that as presented and printed to you, we were at 0.43% decrease to the overall operating, but if council was agreeable and allowed us to go to the full 1% increase in expenditures for operating, then it would leave a $435,000 contingency. And that contingency would be utilized for instances like this where we could then put the money into the community groups and knowing that we're still slightly over the 1% mandated increase to expenditures, plus look at potential census to be done in 2022, look at the internet connectivity in this building and see what those additional costs would be.
Okay, yeah. You did say that. I just went over my head at that point. Thank you.
Councilor Dean?
So coming back to that overall $6,000 reduction, looks to me like it would be about $800 per group there, if you did the math somewhere in there. And at the risk of sounding like Scrooge, I know sitting on the Community Services Board, when we review the community groups' applications for capital grants, one of the things that we take into consideration is their overall financial health. And there's a couple of those organizations that are very, very healthy, and that might not be for all of them because they didn't all ask for grant money, but two in particular have very, very healthy bank balances. And so if this is a strategy that we're trying to come across the board, I don't see that $800 per community association is a real hardship.
Okay. There's another thing on here, and I wouldn't have twigged to this unless I just come from where I did, but the additionally named insured, the 75% of premiums for community groups, that's not in there as a grant. Is it? Where does that money come from for the insurance for the buildings and everything? Because that's all through RMA insurance, correct?
Yeah. So I'll explain and then my colleagues can supplement that. So the community groups have an option of being insured as an association with the municipality. I think all of them do take advantage of that. They get, in theory, decreased insurance rates, right? Several years ago, we had one of the organization failed to pay their insurance bill, and as a result, council changed the policy to say that you can still do it, but we'll deduct that from your operating costs. We pay it on your behalf, and we pay 75% of your premium, but we take 100% of the premium deducted from there, right?
And that's still done in this case?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Anything further? Do we want to up it? Do we want to leave it the same? What's the decision of council here?
I have no issue with Dave's opinion that it should be increased, like we shouldn't decrease it. I don't see the reason for that, so I would agree with that if that's what he wants to do.
Okay, Councillor Kuchen?
So is that an increase across the board, or would we identify those ones that are actually in need of it? Because for me, we would have that ability to say, you know what, if there's a group that's struggling, let's give them a hand, but let's see if we can't help them get past this and improve the way that they're doing business.
Councillor Kush?
I just, for an example, say for how last year went anyways, I'm gonna use the Ensemble board because that's the one that I sit on. Typically, it's a very healthy, financially very viable community. They've done a lot of stuff as far as fundraising and stuff of their own to like replace roofs and a lot of, I guess, like equipment and stuff within the facility. Typically, like the grant money they were getting before we changed the policy, was it 2 years ago, was over 5,000. We cut the policies back to kind of, and basically in a sense try to make it so everybody a little bit more financially, how do you put it? Like,
Responsible.
yeah, responsible, kind of on their own. To take a look at where, like, there are groups, like, I completely agree with Councillor Dean said, that we do have groups that struggle and they need the funding, and other groups that don't require it. The group that I had just, when we came into last year's, just with the lack of, or we'll say just with COVID and how everything played out with the lack of rentals and lack of events and everything that went on, for them, we'll say, typically budgeting for a few $1,000s at least to come back in grant money to help offset some of the costs, qualify for nothing. And it was, most of the small groups were like that, just they didn't have the rentals and the extra, I guess, receipts and everything to kind of go back against that. This, well, the way that the policy works, everything we have on those are maximums that they can apply to. Just, I would like to see the 6,000 kind of left in there, so if a group comes back and they require it, in the part that they're, or I guess, capable of applying to, it's still there. But that, again, like you said, that doesn't mean that, they are going to end up receiving all that. I mean, we have a max set based off criteria. If they don't meet the criteria, they don't get that max amount. It was just a way to try to make more, like you said, financial responsibility.
Councillor Dean?
And, in support of that idea, like contrary to what I just said, one of the opinions I expressed at our community services meeting last night is we all know that it's difficult to maintain a volunteer base, and when you have good volunteers, you certainly want to support them and applaud their efforts to make the organization viable. And if they're doing a good job, I don't think that should preclude them from applying for funding. So I'm kind of sitting on the fence, but I certainly hear what you're saying. So if I can interpret what you're saying, that if we put that money back in, the applications from the groups may not total that extra additional money.
It may not. Like we said, last year, we, I guess in the spring after the budgets, I think it was in the spring, we actually had to review the policy because when all the grant funding and the applications were put in from the groups, most of them qualified for nothing. So we made just one time, because the policy, when we put it out, we didn't know how things were going to play out with the groups. And after the policies come out, we've run into now 2 years of COVID, so it's really hard to, I guess, get a good understanding on how it's going to run. But these are maximum amounts, which doesn't mean that they're actually going to apply and qualify for the maximum amounts to start with.
Fair enough.
Well, and just to the maximum amounts end of it, that's to do with utilities, right? A large portion of that had to do with utilities, so we paid for some of the utility bills, or all of the utility bills, but the bills had to be submitted, and I think that's where you're getting that. There was a bunch of bills that operationally had to be submitted at the end of the year, so we weren't kind of sure where they'd end up. They may be under, they may be over, but we were kind of sure that they were there, so.
Yeah, they're based off of utility or percentages of utility costs, percentages of insurance, let's say volunteer hours, could kind of put towards that. There was funding available for ice rinks, mowing, like just different things, different criteria that everybody could put into percentages back based off of like skilled tradesmen for receipts and bills that kind of went in. It was I guess a kind of a conglomerate of everything kind of put into one off the application, and then they kind of total to it.
Similar to a provincial grant,
Yeah.
sweat equity
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have no problem with that. Again, these folks are out there providing a service for their residents, for residents that we represent, and they're doing a good job. So the last thing I'd ever want to do is send a signal that we don't support them.
Councillor
I was just gonna comment on it, like the 5-year average is 430,000 and we're down to 250, so I think keeping that in is probably a good idea, especially in the times we are now. A lot of people are doing stuff more locally. These groups are very important, I believe, and for that much money, I don't see the purpose in cutting it. I think it's a good
Mr.
decision.
Franks just pulled the policy up here so we can verify.
And apologize to Counselor.
No, I was done.
We cut your time off on there, right?
No, that's good.
Keto was, retrieved it quickly and.
That's good.
Was too quick to bring it up.
That's good.
Sorry, and I've got my mask on. That is the operational, and if you just kind of zoom out a little bit, Nikita, please. And it just gives council some of the costs associated with the operating costs. And there are some, and I can't quite see it, some criteria based on, like Councillor Kush had indicated, on volunteer hours and stuff like that, so. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Ooh, fireworks.
And the operating grants, so that those toilets, ovens, all the asks that came in from the groups, that all comes out of this pot of money as well?
Yes.
See, I'm thinking we can find 6,000 in that.
Under the operating, or the certain capital.
Well, I mean, it's just, yeah.
Well, if I may, and that's a good point, that previous year, what was our capital grant for, total capital grant for the community halls? It should be on your, in your budget somewhere. So, your worship, members of council, just here's my thinking is, they apply for capital grants. Council, there's a recommendation from the Community Services Board. Council typically will endorse that unless it's over the allocated amount total from previous years. And I believe this year is a reduction, if I can.
Because we were having that's kind of what got us on the page of going down the route of, you know, what's specifically capital and what's operating, and are we blurring the lines between which pool of money this should be coming out of with, you know, replacing large items and things like that. So is that operating or is that capital?
Yeah, so again, the financial people will have a different definition.
Right.
Maintenance people have a different definition of what's capital, and administration in general has a different definition sometimes.
And
Right.
maybe we need to tighten that up in the policy.
Yeah.
Like, so that it's identified, so that we understand as a council, as, you know, members change out and things, that they, and that the clubs are applying in the areas. I sound like the Grinch probably, but
It's clarification.
what's that?
It's clarification. I
Yeah.
think it's good if everyone's on the same page and you know where that line is drawn. It's easier to keep track of.
Councilor Dean?
But coming back to the question that's being asked, whether or not we want to put the $7,000 back in, that money is going to be allocated out of a reserve fund. So I don't think it's imperative that we determine exactly where that money's coming from today. If we want to put the $7,000 back in, let's put the $7,000 back in, and administration will account for it.
Well, that's why I'm wondering about putting the 7,000 back in, because there was one item that we had a discussion about the other night that was done kind of thing, and we ended up funding it, and it was well more than that. So
Yeah, that was a capital grant request.
that was in an operating, wasn't
It was a capital.
Yeah.
it? Was it capital?
It was a capital.
Okay. Well, if it's, then why are those things under the,
They were listed. They were listed as capital grants and then the
At the very
operating.
beginning,
yes,
under the capital
The
grant
capital
top
grants,
three are
operating grants.
capital.
Yeah,
and then operating.
sorry, now I'm mixing them up.
And if I may, Mayor Burrows and Mr. Council, although the community groups refer to it as a capital grant, we are funding it through our operational budget. All of this that we're talking about is our operational budget. There's no monies to any community groups on our capital project list. So while they may classify it as a capital for them, we're still funding it through operations.
Okay, Councillor Williams?
Through the chair to Alicia, just on that, so does that, their capital grants, does that still come out of their operational maximum? Or does that, is it got its own line item of a pool of money, I guess? I just don't know.
Through the chair to Councillor Williams, there is, through the operating budget, there is two distinctions. One is for capital grants and one is for operating allocations, but they're both, when council is referring to it, it's all coming out of the operation budget.
Is it that maximum though? Like, I can't even see which one is what, but, like say Anselmo, if they had something, would it come out of that 5,000 maximum or does it go over that if it's a capital?
The 5,000 is their operating grant.
Okay, and then
So
that
if
other
they
is-
had a capital project that they
Mr.
were
Chair.
applying for, it would be a separate line
Okay,
item.
thank you. That was what I was curious about.
Councillor Dean?
So I think I'm saying this right, Councillor Williams. If you look at the Recreation Board summary and the budget for 2022 for grants and transfers is $250,152. So whether it's a capital request or it's an operating request, all of that money comes out of that number, and then internally, Joe will
Allocate
decide
it
how to
whichever
do
way.
that.
Okay,
So
Yep.
adding $7,000, it would go back into that'd become
pool of money and,
257
Yep.
and change.
and if I could, I go back to the 5-year average, 431,000, and we're down to 250. So it's been cut quite a lot. So I think they've probably done a good job managing their money because everyone's still operating. So I think that extra 6,000 probably is going to be money well spent.
So do we need a motion to that effect, or is that? how
We
we're
can
looking?
just draw this one, leave it in.
Yeah.
Council President, okay, Ian,
We're adjusting it.
adjusted.
Noted. Noted.
This will end up being.
She's already got it noted.
This will end up being a passing of the whole thing
Okay,
for
sorry, yeah.
for expediency. This is easier than, and everybody gets a say and everybody gets input. So if you're okay with that, we can go motion by motion if you want. Again, this is council's machinery here, so.
Yeah, I was just trying to push this along.
No, I know.
You're really hung up on
Okay.
7,000.
Anything else? Nope. Okay. We did,
Moving. Oh, so we are slipping, I see my binders, it may be not on, but we're flipping to the Parks and Recreation tab now. I'm gonna have to get back a couple pages in the very near future.
Worship and council, I'm back. And what everyone's been waiting for, Parks and Rec. So you've probably heard in the last few years, we've really wheeled back on our, what we do with Parks and Rec, so we're mostly doing just maintenance on the sites is all we do now, so that's what we focused on last year. And up there, we have a decrease of 3% this year, for us. The reductions we have that are noteworthy, contracted services have been reduced by $50,000. And that is just with the changes and then looking back to the historic, that's the number we're able to reduce here for this year. And it does show an increase in wages of just under 125,000. 75,000 is actually for this department, and there's 50,000 that is actually going through a different department.
Just simply reallocation of where people are working within the various departments. So we have some admin support and some coordinator time also in the wage line for the Parks and Recreation.
Okay. Counselor Dean?
Can you just explain the zero in the other local government? What used to go into that? See, the 5-year average is 610,000, now it's zero.
Through the chair to Councillor Dean, any of the lines that you're coming across that are the 200-300 other local government, those are all entries that have historically been made through various cost share agreements. And again, with us trying to not have these anomalies coming in all the time for the cost share agreements, we're trying to put everything into that 215 so that when we're looking at that, we're looking in one section. So this 5-year average is just pulling because the historical is still there. We're moving forward on it.
And what's 215, sorry?
The intermunicipal cost sharing.
Counselor Wilhelm?
Through the chair to Mrs. Barboa, I see we amortized in 2021, but we haven't budgeted any of that for 2022. That's like parks equipment and all that kind of stuff. Or how does that work?
Through the chair, Councillor Wilhelm. Yes, exactly, that's what it is. And again, this is our maintenance that we've done with our fixed asset system and attaching it. Some of our units weren't attached throughout the GL, and we've done considerable work on that. So those lines will be allocated, but again, amortization is non-cash, so it will be an in and an out. It doesn't affect your bottom line on your budget.
Right, okay.
Okay, and then just going back to with that increase in the wages, the portion that we are taking, what we are looking at is maybe another summer student just to help, and then possibly keep them on a little bit longer into the past September so we can maintain the sites a little bit longer for everyone out there to enjoy.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So coming back to that salary and wages, so it's up by 125. Those other departments that these wages are now being allocated to, so those other departments will be reduced by 125. Okay. Thank you.
And then the last line is another one for Russia. Oh, was that the one? Okay.
It didn't rivet you to your seat.
So those were the big highlights. There's not a lot of changes just for maintaining the sites.
Any other questions? Nope. You're all set.
And I believe we're coming to our last, which is our library and culture. And again, this is one of the sections that have had some items added in and pulled out. So I'm sure there'll be a couple of anomaly questions to answer, but I'll ask Joan to come in if she would, because she does manage the library portion and the culture portion a little bit through community services.
So the 8% decrease to expenditures from 2021 to 2022.
That's the money for your cemetery.
So there was money taken for expenditures, we wanted expenditures, but here we need to. We need to get this fixed. We'll continue. So as far as the libraries go, there's the know in the regional library that we contribute funds to based on the population. There's the Woodlands County Library Board. And there's also a proposed 65,000 board. There was an agreement forwarded to them. I'm not certain as to where that is at.
It's tied up in arbitration right now.
Any questions on the library and essentially its status quo, just the movement of money to support cemeteries under the upper municipal heading? They're a number 56 in all of the municipalities. We're just trying to realign. The last tab in the book is requisitions, and that's simply a reminder to council that we are collector, if you will, for the education tax as well as the senior deputation tax. So those monies flow through our annual taxation notices that are generated, but we simply collect that on behalf of others in court. So the final summation that's up here on this slide indicates the budget as printed and presented is slightly under the 1%. And if council is agreeable to it, we would increase the expenditure amount to the full 1%, which would leave a $445,000 contingency, which is where we would take the additional monies for the community group out. So that number would change by $7,000 in final presentation. And the contingency would be administered, if you will, by council. Allotments or allocations from it would come in throughout the year before council through an RFP and an advisement that this is when, and determination of where we felt money would be reasonably spent. I know a big priority that we've discussed is the internet connectivity. We just do not have a good understanding of what that increases our monthly costs by.
Go ahead, Councilor Prestige.
Through the chair to Mr. Bashan, just some clarity on the leasing on the graders. I like doing the leasing. I'm just questioning, is that money going to be coming out of our operational budget, or is it related back to our capital?
Through the chair to Council Prestige, those funds come out of the operating.
So that will leave our $3 million capital budget to do more work on our roads and bridges.
Through the chair to Councilor Prestige, we did not budget for the graders in the capital.
Yeah, in foreseeing the next budget, that amount of money we won't be buying graders, so that won't be part of our capital budget anymore.
Through the chair to Councilor Prestige, that is correct. For 2022, we will not identify the purchase of any graders.
Okay. Any other questions to admit on this? All right. Councilor Wilhelm.
Motion that council accepts the 2022 draft budget presentation as information.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Do we need a last meeting, or is there anything that anyone's uncomfortable with in this, or can we get those? I mean, there's only the one change, and then we'd be looking at passing the budget at a council meeting is the next one, wouldn't it?
Your worship, members of council, if council is acceptable, we would present at the December 22nd meeting. You'll get the full document once again, right? So if you want to hand in your binder, that's fine. If not, we'll recycle and find some other binders. But if that's acceptable, and then we'll do the appropriate motions, that are required. And we can start working January 1st.
Yeah, this is just a general question to council. Is there anything you're uncomfortable with, or you want some more of, or are you ready to move to that step? It looks like yes, so Councillor Kluken.
Yeah, I'd just like to say to you, Alicia and the administration is that when we were first presented with the draft budget, it was very, very confusing to those of us that were new. And I really appreciate you guys, setting this out the way it is, because it was a lot clearer and it gives us a direction to go. So thank you for that.
Through the chair to all of council, the first draft was definitely, this was to be the format always. Just didn't have the opportunity to have it presented to you at the first meeting. So I appreciate the consideration that everyone provided. We'll move forward with this. I'm sure some prior council members will attest to the fact that this has been cleaned up considerably in the last year, even from other years. So we can just continue working and getting it condensed, and it's not always the amount of paper that's important, it's what the paper says, so that's what our goal always is.
Okay, thank you, and thanks to staff and everybody that attended and presented as well. With that, I'll accept a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Nope, there's no discussion on a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Carried.